This episode of The Energy Show is proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, green building, sustainability, Title 24, energy efficient building codes, they're all still the rules, and they're really important. But they're complicated to navigate in an ideal world, like before 2025. And it's really questions for everybody is what to do with these concepts now that the political perspective has changed. And, some people are against climate change. I mean, I'm not even supposed to say global warming anymore. And in some ways, green has negative connotations to some people. I heard a rumor that there's a hit out on Sesame Street's Kermit the Frog. That may or may not be true. But the green building depends on energy efficiency, and energy efficiency leverages a lot of these technologies that we've had, like solar, batteries, heat pumps, and even controls. Obviously, there's things with insulation that are going to improve energy efficiency, but that's kind of old school. The new stuff is very, very cool and makes big, big differences. But the trajectory of the implementation of these technologies is really changing with the Trump administration. Some of it for good, some of it for bad. So I don't want to get too political about this. So I really want to talk mostly on the real world implications for homeowners who are looking at energy efficiency and looking at both from the technology standpoint and the public policy standpoint. So my guest on this week's show is Jeff Aalfs. Jeff's a sustainability and green building expert, and he clearly understands the benefits of electrification, but he also understands public policy and politics, which have an enormous impact on things. Jeff spent 17 years on the town council in Portola Valley, California, and he's currently a director of Peninsula Clean Energy, one of the local community choice aggregation utilities. We'll dive into what that means in a minute. So I'm looking forward to Jeff's perspective on the intersections of energy efficiency, public policy, and customer economics. So welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's a long intro, but I also know that you're at Arcturus, which is your company. So if you could give people a little bit of background about what Arcturus is.
Okay, so Arcturus is my day job. I'm a consultant. I work mostly with architects and contractors, and most of that work is around code compliance. And so I'm a Title 24 consultant, which means that I work with architects to make sure that their projects comply with the California Building Energy Code. I'm also a green building consultant. I'm a Green Point rater. I'm an ICC certified green building plans examiner. So I also work with architects and contractors to basically enforce CalGreen. And CalGreen sort of, the energy code is pretty much statewide with a few REACH code exceptions, but CalGreen is sort of enforced differently in every jurisdiction.
How do those codes apply to people doing retrofits on their homes as opposed to new construction?
They're different, but you go through a very similar process. When I'm doing energy efficiency, when I'm doing the energy code compliance, almost all of my projects are what's called a performance approach, where I actually model the building. I build a model, and that's true whether it's a new building or an existing building that's being retrofitted. So the code compliance process is fairly similar, even though the construction process is quite different.
Give me a little bit of an idea on how quickly those codes change and Title 24 changes with new technology. I mean, when heat pumps came out, it probably took a little while. And first time I tried to get a heat pump hot water heater permitted in San Jose, they said, well, we don't allow electric hot water heaters anymore. I'm like, but what's this, a heat pump? How is that working?
Yeah. So the code changes every 3 years. So a new code cycle comes in, and the last one was the 2022 code cycle actually kicked in on January 1st, 2023. The 2025 code cycle will kick in January 1st, 2026. So the code cycle is 3 years. As soon as one code kicks in, the process for the next code is already underway, for a process for writing the next generation of the code. And so, we could be making decisions now that will affect projects 5 or 6 years in the future. And technology can move a lot faster than that. Now, that said, when I first started this, I've been doing this for about 15 years, and I can remember back to when, tankless gas water heaters were first introduced, and there was this huge backlash against them and nobody wanted to install them. The Energy Code moved sort of slowly to encourage them, and now they're actually fairly standard. And now they're slowly giving way to heat pump water heaters. And the same thing. The Energy Code it's a 3-year cycle. It's always going to sort of lag technology. But the fact is we've watched, various things, heat pumps, mini splits, heat pump water heaters, all these things go from being these sort of alien, scary things to architects and contractors to becoming commonplace.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And we've had the struggles between heat pump water heaters and flash hot water heaters, electric hot water heaters. It's confusing. All right, so we talked a little bit about CCAs, Community Choice Aggregation Utilities. Tell us what those are and then how that fits in with your role at Peninsula Clean Energy.
Okay, so CCA is Community Choice Aggregation. And so the legislation enabling it was coming from 2002. And so what's happened now in California is we've got approximately, I've lost count, but probably 20 or 25 different entities. Peninsula Clean Energy is a government-backed nonprofit. So it is basically it's called a Joint Powers Authority. The County of San Mateo, the 20 cities and towns in San Mateo County, and the city of Los Banos in Merced County are all basically signatories to an agreement that creates basically an energy authority. And so Peninsula Clean Energy now procures about 98% of the electricity used in San Mateo County. 98% of it is contracted by Peninsula Clean Energy and delivered over PG&E's infrastructure. Yeah, so we're a nonprofit, and our goals very much deal with things like lowering prices for customers and decarbonization.
Yeah, I remember reading an article about how the utilities in California were so angry and offended and protective of their monopoly that they spent over $40 million to overturn that legislation in 2002, and they lost. But there's still those fights, and I know that when the CCAs came out, Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, San Jose Clean Energy, the rates there were a few pennies less. And then the utilities came back and added extra charges and kind of constrained that a little bit more. So there's always a war there, but I'm very much in favor of just trying to get customers less expensive electricity, clean electricity, and something that's not constrained by the utility monopolies.
It's definitely added a layer of competition, and we have some advantages come with the IOUs. I will say that the team at PCE has managed, our contracting very well, and we're not, we actually have a motivation to negotiate contracts sort of vigorously. PG&E takes their generation cost and passes it directly to the consumers and has actually minimal incentive to, negotiate for better contracts. They also have some legacy contracts that are really expensive, and they own some generation of their own, which is tremendously expensive, especially things like Diablo Canyon. It's a fine resource, it's baseload, but nuclear is very expensive. We're not, we're obviously not contracted for nuclear. We're contracting largely for solar, wind, and some hydro. So our costs are cheaper, and we are passing that on to customers.
Yeah, and you're not motivated to maximize your assets like the utilities are. So you're using existing assets that are going to be a lot cheaper than things that are owned by the utility on which they have to pay dividends to the investors.
Our incentives are very different, and most people, I think, don't understand the extent to which an investor-owned utility is actually not serving customers well, and that the rate of return, which is basically their cost of capital, is about twice what you'd get if you were just going out into issuing munis. So it's tremendously inefficient. We're working around that. I think the alternative has been a really positive one for much of California.
Yeah, and I'm very glad to see that the CCAs are really kind of taking off. So let's turn that from just general what a CCA is. How are CCAs helping with home electrification and reducing greenhouse gas burdens that are generated by people in California?
Yeah, so the first thing that the PCE did and other CCAs did, I'd say that Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which is the CCA for Santa Clara County, have kind of, well, I take that back. Several CCAs have done a lot of leadership on this. The first thing that we've been doing is rebates. So we offer rebates for a variety of technologies, particularly electrification technologies. And we have gotten better over the years at sort of spelling those rebates out very clearly for customers, because there are actually rebates available from a lot of different sources, and it's kind of it's a jungle out there trying to figure out where the rebates are coming from and how to get them. So we actually, among other things, we vet and qualify contractors to qualify for our rebates and some other related rebates. We have actually now launched basically what's a concierge service for home electrification. It's called Home Upgrade. It's available on the Peninsula Clean Energy website. And we have a call center, and we have people, and they actually walk through the process with you. And so they can help you with finding contractors, identifying your needs. So it takes this process and it makes it a lot less, in my opinion, scary for the homeowner. And so we're trying to publicize, it's called Home Upgrade. Silicon Valley Clean Energy has a comparable program whose name is, I'm forgetting right now. But so now we're guiding homeowners through that process. We're also now offering more financing. And so we're really trying to offer sort of on-bill financing in particular to make these projects just easier to pay for up front, because, the barriers to this are people are just, they don't know what to do or how to do it. We're trying to help with that. And then they just, it's hard to pay for all of that up front. So we're offering them an alternative where they pay for it over time on the bills.
And they would pay for that over time on their PG&E bills?
Well, it would be a PCE charge on the PG&E bill, but
Right.
PG&E issues our bills, but our charges show up separately.
No, I'm a big fan of that kind of on-bill financing.
Yes.
I haven't really seen it take off yet. And you're absolutely right. The incentives for clean energy, the tax credits and the rebates, it's just like quicksand. And even the IRA tax credits. The IRA tax credits are solid through 2025, but the rebates are, here they are, they're gone tomorrow. And I'm very, we operate mostly in Silicon Valley area, so the rebates that PCE offers, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, San Jose Clean, they're pretty good. They're like $2,000 or $3,000 for a heat pump or heat pump water heater, and we're great. That's great. We're directing our customers to that. But we'll see what happens in 2026 and beyond.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. How has the momentum for home electrification changed over the last 3 or 4 years?
I got to say, most projects that I see, heat pump space conditioning went from kind of an exotic thing to becoming almost a default. So I rarely see anybody say they want I rarely see a new project, a new house, or even a major remodel where they say, I want another furnace. It happens, but it's become a lot less common. The heat pump water heaters, again, went from sort of this thing that people were a little scared of to something that's become pretty standard. Every now and then somebody pushes for a gas tankless, but still I'd say that in certain areas I'm still seeing mostly heat pump water heaters. So I think the technology has become a lot less, I guess, scary to both installers and homeowners. And so it's got a certain inertia to that. It's a little more expensive, but if you're building a new house, it's actually it's a rounding error among all of the costs of a new house, especially here in Silicon Valley. So what I tell people is, electrification is basically a set of better products. An electric heat pump water heater is a better product than a gas water heater, in my opinion, for a variety of reasons. Heat pump space conditioning is a better product than a furnace. Your electric vehicle is a better product than a typical gas car, for all but a handful of uses. But where I'm sitting, it's becoming much more of the default and the incumbent. And it's hard to imagine people going back to gas appliances.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, every single case, and we've done some complete electrifications. I did the same thing on my house. And even my wife agrees that the induction cooktop is a better product than the gas cooktop.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah.
And so we cook on that all the time. Now, it's important to make a distinction because we see something different because we focus here at Cinnamon Energy Systems, and I'm sure other solar installers getting into electrification, the same things. Most of our business is retrofits. So we have somebody that got a gas furnace or they have a gas hot water heater and it breaks and then they have to replace it. And most of the contractors out there are comfortable with, it's just cheaper and easier to put in a direct replacement. I'll put in another single speed air conditioning compressor. I'll put in another gas furnace. Yeah. But they lose out on that long-term benefit of something that's electrified. And when you're building your home is powered by solar, it just makes so much sense. So that's a challenge for us. And contractors are kind of reluctant to try something new, especially their salespeople who just, they want to be in and out with something simpler.
Oh yeah, contractors are definitely, there's a lot of inertia there. I tell people if you call a plumber, you're going to get whatever the plumber likes to install right now.
Yep.
And that's why we're trying to drive more people. When somebody's water heater pump breaks, we want them to call Peninsula Clean Energy and go through that process, which can actually be very fast.
Yeah.
We're working on that, but you call a contractor, you don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah. Now, let's just touch a little bit on the political third rail. What changes are you seeing right now that there's a new administration in place and they're not really as supportive of green technologies?
Yeah. Well, we haven't seen, in the building side, I have not seen a lot yet. Other than, like we've talked about, like sort of tariffs are affecting the products coming into the country. That's a big deal. But as far as sort of the regulation, the rebates, the big rebates that I see coming from the federal government are for EVs. And that landscape is really, it worries me. But we're still offering all of our rebates and will for the foreseeable future. And so in that area, the biggest problem is going to be the equipment here. Can we get things shipped? A lot of our technology is coming from China. So will the prices go up too much? from a policy standpoint, I just don't think we're going back to gas appliances on a regular basis.
Well, you nailed it. It's something that's really important. I'm putting this in bold words is, electrified appliances are just better products. Where are the heat pump water heaters made? Are they mostly made in Asia, China? I know where you're doing a lot of Rheem installations.
That is I do a lot of Rheem installations, and honestly, it's a good question. I should probably know that.
Yeah. I mean, as far as heat pump HVAC, we're mostly installing Mitsubishi. Mitsubishis are still manufactured mostly in Japan.
Okay.
Some of the others aren't, and some of the others, I think Carrier might have a plant in Mexico. But it is really a challenge for us. And even for new construction, somebody's building a home and their contractor's got a schedule and they got to put in the heat pump water heater or something. And, if that HVAC system is delayed, that delays everything.
Yeah. I'm seeing more Carrier's heat pumps on a lot of projects. It used to be, if I saw a heat pump, it was Mitsubishi or Daikin, but now I'm seeing more Carrier. So which is encouraging to me that the sort of larger American manufacturers are sort of have joined the trend the way that, a lot of it was really initiated by the Japanese, but America is coming on board. And the fact that more big manufacturers are doing it is always a good sign.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Well, all right. So you mentioned financing. I'd like to drill down on that a little bit more. On-bill financing, absolutely terrific. Can you do on-bill financing for solar and batteries, or is it just for the HVAC heat pumps?
I'm trying to remember if we're actually specifically doing that. I feel like a lot of that has gone through solar contractors in the past, but there's no reason why we couldn't. Because, it's the same mechanism. It's going to run with the account or the property. That is a good question. I should know the answer to that.
About a dozen years ago, I worked really, really hard with some people in Silicon Valley to get PG&E to accept on-bill financing. We went up to Portland Gas and Electric, and they had a program. It was great. Yeah. But the PG&E just basically put their foot down and says, we don't want to do any on-bill financing. The subtext was for something that's competing with our delivery of electricity. So that was kind of a dead end. But boy, if that takes off for us, what's working really, really well are credit unions. It's basically, once again, a nonprofit, a little bit complicated, but you can fund a $100,000 project usually with them, which is going to cover the heat pump, the solar, the batteries, kind of everything at the best rates you can currently get.
Interesting. I mean, with solar and batteries, I see a lot of power purchase agreements were the sort of the solution a while ago, but there's no reason why on-bill financing couldn't be an alternative to that.
Yeah. On-bill financing is better because it's just fairer for the customer. The power purchase agreement's owned by a third party. There's going to be a lot of monkey business going on in the back, and it's really, really complicated. But just having a on-bill financing is terrific. Well, let's just kind of take a step back. What are you seeing the successes that the customers are having, and what are some of the mistakes that homeowners make when they start thinking about electrification?
Well, okay, I'm a little biased here. I see a lot of oversized, or at least people calling out oversized systems where, somebody's calling for a heat pump base conditioning and they just haven't done a load calculation. And so they're getting equipment that, in my opinion, is far too big. And one of the things that I do is in the modeling also creates sort of load calculations. And so if at all possible, you should work with a contractor who can do room by room load calculations to make sure that you're getting the right size equipment. That's probably the one thing that I see is people, I think, in my opinion, are getting units that are just way too big, far more than what they need. And it's actually inefficient to have a unit that's too big because it runs half the time.
Yeah, no, I've got a good friend, and before we started putting in heat pumps, he had the local, a local company put in a heat pump for him, and it was in conjunction with the solar and the batteries that we had done, and it's just way oversized, and he's very uncomfortable. The blower goes on for like 5 minutes. His house gets hot. It makes a lot of noise. It draws a tremendous amount of power when it fires up, and then then it just cycles. Yeah. Whereas a properly designed heat pump system, and our sales process is oriented exactly what you're talking about. We got an expert. He's been doing it forever. He's a building sciences expert, and he's really trying to figure out what's going to be best. Sometimes it's good system, sometimes it's all mini split, sometimes it's a mix, and we really kind of drill down to that. But I have a heat pump in my house, and the thing is just like silent. It runs most of the time. The power draw on the grid, when that thing starts up, it draws only 1 amp. Wow. Whereas a regular air conditioner might draw 30 or 40 amps or more.
And you'd be,
and you didn't even know the thing's going, and then it just kind of ramps up to whatever it needs. So it's really, really good.
Yeah. I mean, the other interesting thing is, a lot of projects I see include panel upgrades, and people are upgrading to 400 amp panels. You can, in many cases, obviously do these things on even a 100 or 120 amp panel. And so finding someone who's really, thoughtfully going to look at your panel loads and managing, the new loads so that you can do this, because a panel upgrade could be several $1,000s. And so if you can get somebody to this electrification without the panel upgrade, that's actually it's a big win.
I'll tell you what the numbers are because we do them all the time. The numbers for a panel upgrade in Silicon Valley, always in the $6,000 to $8,000 range.
Okay.
And that's for overhead wiring. And a lot of the cost is due to the fact that there's the coordination with the utility and the building department and rewiring things. And sometimes you have to move the panel because when it was installed, it was you know, code compliant. And now it's not code compliant, so you got to move it 2 feet over. A lot of work. For above ground service, it could easily be $20,000 and take 12 to 18 months. Easily. And there's so many cases where we've, you know, worked with customers and we follow all the rules. PG&E asks for a bunch of money up front. And then, you know, contractors digging, and there's a half a dozen inspections even before the system's installed. And sometimes the inspectors don't show up and our costs go through the roof. So it's really complicated. So I like the idea of trying to stay confident that we can always do it with a 200 amp service. Sometimes, you know, if you have a 100 amp service, it's going to be hard to run, you know, an EV and a heat pump water heater. But, you know, 125 is manageable. There's some new capabilities with battery systems that they can kind of manage those loads. But 200 amp is, you can pretty much do anything unless you have a 5,000 plus square foot house.
I agree. All
right. What other things are working really well for homeowners?
I guess, you know, you mentioned the induction cooktops, and I see a lot more of them. And it's just, again, it's just hard to imagine going back to, you know, where gas cooktops are the regular. I mean, even the people that sort of insist on gas cooktops, a lot of them, you know, they get converted because it's a better product. I mean, you know, turn on, you know, boil water on your induction cooktop and then boil water on your gas cooktop and just roll your hands around the pot as it's going, and your hands will get hot around the gas fired, but you can put your hand within an inch of the pot on the induction cooktop and not feel anything. And that's because all the energy is going into the pot.
It's the demonstration that I do for people when they want to see it. I take a frying pan, I put like half an inch of water in it, I put it on the induction cooktop burner, I turn it on, and within 60 seconds the water's burning. Then I take the pan off, and then I put my hand on the burner, and it's just warm. And it responds quickly. I mean, it actually responds quicker than gas in a lot of cases. And you're not poisoning the air in your house. I mean, it's just sort of, people don't understand. I mean, you're creating formaldehyde, which is just a horrible thing to be breathing for your, you know, children, your pets to be breathing. And it's easier to clean too, because I'm always making a mess. And it's just like, you know, everything's glass. Boom, done. Instead of kind of get the grease out of the corners and everything. All right, well, what about some of the comfort issues? Talk about how electrified homes are, I mean, we mentioned safety briefly, but what are some of the comfort improvements?
Well, I mean, the heat pump is a properly sized heat pump should run basically all the time on the coldest day of the year, which means you're getting a steady sort of flow of heat. I mean, your furnace is going to kick out very hot air until the air in the house equilibrates to a certain temperature, and then it's going to stop, and the air is going to slowly get cold. The heat pump is going to be steadily pumping out a cooler stream of air, but it'll keep your temperature much more consistent, for one thing. You know, I also just recommend that if people are doing major retrofits, they look carefully at their, you know, just adding insulation, maybe changing a few windows, and also just air sealing the structure, because that will contribute a huge amount to comfort along with the system. It might even allow you to get a smaller system, which again will be both cheaper and operate more efficiently. But yeah, no, heat pumps definitely, sort of that delivery of sort of just warm enough air constantly is a much better comfort solution than a blast of hot air every half hour or so. Now,
when we put the heat pump in, we also replaced our ductwork in the 50-year-old house, and the ductwork was mostly all accessible, so that worked out fine. And when we turned it on, I couldn't even hear the system running. It's just, and then it just beautifully controlled. We have a couple of Nest thermostats, and I can't recommend it highly enough. All right. Well, how did you get into green building in the beginning?
In another life, I was a biochemist. Once upon a time, I had a PhD. Well, I still have it, but I used to actually use it. 18 years ago, my daughter was born, and I decided that I wanted to do something different with my life and something that would make the world just a slightly better place for my children. And about that same time, we actually started on a construction project on our own house, which ended up taking probably 2.5 years from design to the end. And I got very interested in the construction process, and I discovered sort of the energy consulting and the green building consulting within that process. And I just started, you know, taking classes, reading. I basically just hung out my own shingle, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow, well, that's pretty good. Well, how can people get in touch with you at Arcturus?
The easiest way is to email me, jeff@arcturushd.com. That's my email address. I don't really have a website. Again, most of my businesses refer to me from architects, but I mean, in addition to the code compliance, I actually really love working with people who want to just sort of optimize their project for energy efficiency and even net zero occasionally. So again, that email address is the best way to reach me.
All right, that's cool. Now, you mentioned something that I'm really intrigued about. How many times can you really get a home to net zero?
If the homeowner's committed to it, it's very feasible. Usually it should be holistic. Like, you definitely want to look at the structure itself, you know, adding insulation if you can, you know, windows are expensive, but they make a big difference in terms of that. You know, insulation and air sealing will minimize the rest of the process. Then you're probably looking at solar and batteries to go along with hopefully a very, a minimal, a highly efficient space heating and a very efficient heat pump water heater. If you just want to put solar panels on your house and a new HVAC system, it's probably going to be expensive. If you look at it holistically, it's very feasible.
Yeah. No, I kind of went through the same process, and we took out the 50-year-old blown-in insulation in the attic. We took out all the old ducts, redid it, and put solar on the roof. And now, with one EV, last few years, we've gotten $100 back from the utility.
Wow.
From San Jose Clean Energy. So we're basically net zero perfectly.
That's great.
And it's even better than that because, we're just talking about on a dollar basis, but it works out pretty well. And that's something that pretty much anybody can do with carefully designing the house, making sure you're doing the insulation, tightening up that shell, and then putting in solar and storage and get there. All right. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Great discussions, Jeff. Thanks for joining me. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you missed any of today's show, you can always go to our website at www.energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
This episode of The Energy Show was proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.